When World War II began in Europe on September 1st, 1939, the United States Army was not ready for a global war. In fact, it was barely ready for anything at all. Most Americans today imagine the U.S. Army of World War II as a massive, unstoppable, highly trained force, an army that crushed the Axis wherever it went. But in 1939, that army did not exist. On paper, the U.S. Army ranked 17th in the world behind Portugal. It had 190,000 active duty soldiers, almost no modern tanks, outdated rifles, almost no automatic weapons, limited artillery, tiny training budgets, minimal officer corps, no combat experience, no large-scale mobilization plans, and no armored doctrine. Germany, meanwhile, had 4 million men under arms, blitzkrieg experience from Poland and France, thousands of officers with combat command time, integrated armor-air tactics, the Panzerwaffe, modern logistics, veteran NCOs, an already matured training pipeline, immense battlefield confidence. The gap was staggering. If the U.S. Army tried to fight Germany in 1939 or 1940, it would have been wiped out. But by 1944, American divisions units that did not exist 5 years earlier would face the Wehrmacht head-on, stop it, outfight it, and eventually overpower it. How did this transformation happen? The answer lies in one of the most ambitious and successful training revolutions in military history. The crisis of 1940. America realizes it is not ready. In May 1940, France collapsed in 6 weeks. The British Army barely escaped Dunkirk. Hitler looked unstoppable. The Wehrmacht had demonstrated a level of speed, coordination, and lethality that no Allied commander had predicted. For the United States, this was a strategic earthquake. Suddenly, the quiet debate about preparedness became a matter of survival. President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Army Chief of Staff George C. Marshall understood something the public did not. If America did not begin training millions of soldiers immediately, it would enter the war already defeated. So in 1940, the U.S. government enacted the first peacetime draft in American history. This was the moment the modern U.S. Army was born. Men began pouring into the service. Factory workers, farm hands, students, clerks, mechanics, unemployed young men, volunteers, draftees, immigrants, men who had never fired a rifle, men who had never traveled outside their hometown. These were the raw recruits, ordinary Americans with no military background. Turning them into effective soldiers was not guaranteed. In fact, early training results were discouraging. Units lacked equipment, barracks were overcrowded, instructors were few, officers were inexperienced, training areas were tiny, weapons were outdated, mock battles were unimpressive, coordination was clumsy. Germany's divisions had years of doctrine behind them. America's had months. So how did this army turn into a force the Wehrmacht learned to fear? The answer begins with one man. George C. Marshall, the architect of America's war army. Marshall, promoted to Chief of Staff in 1939, was given a monumental task: build a modern army from almost nothing in record time. He knew the U.S. Army had 3 fatal weaknesses. 1, too few officers. 2, too little training. 3, outdated doctrine. The first thing he did was controversial. He fired 600 senior officers. Quietly, efficiently, without debate. Most were old, slow, or resistant to change. Marshall needed aggressive leaders who could command millions of men, not thousands. Then, he began promoting young officers rapidly. Eisenhower, Bradley, Patton, Ridgway, Collins, Clark. These men would become the backbone of the wartime U.S. Army. Marshall followed a simple rule: give me men who can win. He then turned to the second problem: how to train millions of soldiers who had never worn a uniform. The training revolution begins. Between 1940 and 1943, the United States built an unprecedented training system. It included 242 new training camps, massive rifle ranges, artillery schools, armored training centers, communications schools, engineering schools, medical training units, logistics courses, NCO academies, officer candidate schools, combined arms maneuver areas, live fire training complexes, mock villages, full-scale battlefield simulations. This was not training like the Wehrmacht. It was training designed to surpass the Wehrmacht. Every soldier marched, shot, dug trenches, threw grenades, navigated terrain, followed maps, learned first aid, practiced squad tactics, endured long field exercises, trained in heat, cold, mud, and rain. A typical American recruit in 1942 received more training hours than a German soldier in 1940. But Marshall wasn't finished. The creation of the regimental and divisional system. Germany's strength lay in its small unit leadership, its corporals, sergeants, and lieutenants. America needed the same advantage. So Marshall and his staff focused on NCO Corps officer education, combined arms at the division level. They reorganized the entire Army around three principles. 1. A division must fight as a self-contained unit: artillery, engineers, medical, logistics, signals, all inside its own structure. 2. Training must simulate real war, not parade ground drills, but night maneuvers, live fire, and long marches. 3. Leadership must be decentralized platoon, and company commanders had freedom to act. This system produced something Germany did not expect: an army capable of operating independently, adapting quickly, and surviving casualties. By late 1942, American divisions arriving in North Africa were no longer raw recruits. They were trained professionals, but they were still untested. The real transformation came with the next step. The Louisiana Maneuvers. America practices for a war. It hasn't fought yet. The Louisiana Maneuvers of 1941 and 1942 were the largest military exercises in American history. 420,000 troops, hundreds of tanks, thousands of trucks, entire divisions facing each other. Mock battles over thousands of square miles. These exercises revealed weaknesses in command, failures in communication, poor coordination, logistical shortfalls, inexperienced officers, doctrinal gaps. And this is what made them so important. America discovered its flaws before fighting Germany. Germany discovered its flaws during combat. After the maneuvers, Marshall replaced hundreds of commanders. Entire units were retrained. Doctrines were rewritten. Officers like Eisenhower and Patton emerged as stars. The U.S. Army was not perfect in 1942, but it was better than in 1941. And by 1943, it would be better still. The Wehrmacht had never faced a learning curve this steep, backed by a nation capable of unlimited expansion. The transformation was only beginning. The forging of a new army. By early 1942, the United States had drafted, signed, or mobilized more than 4 million men, most of them civilians only weeks earlier. But numbers alone do not create a fighting force. What mattered was transformation. And the United States now faced the greatest transformation challenge in the history of its armed forces. Turn millions of ordinary Americans into disciplined, confident, tactically competent soldiers capable of facing the Wehrmacht. To do this, the Army needed more than barracks, rifles, and drill sergeants. It needed a complete cultural shift. It needed to build an army that could shoot accurately, maneuver under fire, operate without detailed instructions, maintain discipline under pressure, coordinate artillery, armor, and infantry, adapt to unexpected situations, absorb casualties and keep fighting, perform complex missions independently. This did not happen automatically. It happened because the U.S. Army invented a new training system from scratch. The basic training revolution, turning civilians into soldiers. When a recruit arrived at camp, the transformation began immediately. Within hours, he received a uniform, a rifle, a serial number, a haircut, a schedule, and a new identity, soldier. But this was not the rigid, harsh training seen in some European armies. American training was intense, but it was built around a different philosophy. Teach the soldier why he is doing something, not just how to do it. This produced soldiers who could think instead of simply obeying orders. A typical 1942-43 American basic training cycle included 8 weeks of physical conditioning, 8-10 weapons qualifications, 100-plus hours of rifle marksmanship, bayonet drills, grenade throwing, squad formations, 10-20-mile marches, close order drill, fieldcraft, camouflage, first aid, gas mask training, night exercises, live fire courses, infiltration under machine gun fire. But the most important part wasn't physical, it was mental. Recruits learned discipline, teamwork, trust, and leadership. They learned to take orders and eventually give them. The American sergeant, the backbone of the new army. The U.S. Army understood something most armies overlooked. The quality of a sergeant determines the quality of a division. So the Army built NCO schools across the country. Here, sergeants learned leadership, tactics, map reading, communications, logistics, mentoring, small unit command, marksmanship coaching, discipline enforcement. Many were only in their mid-20s, but they were taught to think of themselves as instructors, decision-makers, problem-solvers, battlefield leaders. By contrast, the German NCO Corps, though highly competent early in the war, suffered catastrophic losses in Russia and could not replace them. The U.S. NCO system kept expanding. The Wehrmachts shrank. The Combined Arms Revolution, infantry, armor, and artillery fighting as one. The Wehrmacht's greatest strength in 1939-1942 was its integrated use of tanks, infantry, aircraft, and artillery. The United States studied this obsessively. Marshall demanded American divisions must be able to fight combined arms battles without waiting for higher command. So the Army built entire training ecosystems, tank training at Fort Knox, artillery training at Fort Sill, armored infantry schools, anti-tank battalion courses, engineer bridging and demolition training, Signal Corps communications courses, intelligence and reconnaissance training. Then, the Army brought all these elements together in large-scale maneuvers. Infantry trained with tank units, tankers trained with artillery trained with air observers, engineers trained to support attacks in real time. This was new. It created divisions that could coordinate fire support, improvise logistics, build or destroy bridges, integrate radios, adjust artillery in minutes, call airstrikes, advance with armor, defend independently. In short, the U.S. Army became flexible, and flexibility terrifies the Wehrmacht. The Army specialized, creating experts for every task. To fight Germany, America needed more than infantry and tanks. It needed cryptographers, radar operators, radio technicians, machine gunners, mortar teams, mechanics, medics, reconnaissance scouts, surveyors, artillery plotters, supply officers, cooks feeding thousands, truck drivers crossing continents, construction battalions, anti-tank gunners, flamethrower specialists, mine-clearing teams. So the Army created hundreds of specialized schools. A wartime division was not a mass of riflemen. It was a machine with thousands of parts, each trained individually and then assembled into a cohesive fighting force. Germany struggled to match this. By 1943, shortages of fuel, shortages of training aircraft, shortages of instructors, air raids, combat losses made it impossible for the Wehrmacht to maintain its pre-war training standards. The U.S. Army, meanwhile, kept getting better. The officer system. America grows its own leaders. In 1939, most American officers had never commanded more than 100 men. By 1943, they would command thousands. How? OCS, Officer Candidate School. These programs taught civilians to become lieutenants in 90 short but brutal days. The curriculum included leadership psychology, military law, tactics, map reading, weapons training, logistics, field exercises, command under stress. Candidates were tested constantly. Those who hesitated failed. Those who adapted graduated. By 1944, OCS had produced tens of thousands of new officers. Germany relied heavily on officers with pre-war military education. When they died on the Eastern Front, replacements were rushed and inexperienced. The U.S. Army did not have this problem. Its officer pipeline was enormous. Why U.S. training was different: quality through quantity. Most people assume America won because it produced more. That is true, but it is not the full story. The more accurate truth is, America produced so much that it could afford to train longer, harder, smarter. The U.S. Army could fire millions of training rounds, rotate units through months of exercises, waste ammunition, fuel, and equipment during drills, send units back for retraining, remove incompetent officers, keep divisions in the U.S. until ready, replace equipment constantly, give soldiers the best food, medical care, and supplies Germany could not. By 1943, German divisions received fewer training hours. Replacements were rushed to the front. Fuel shortages limited tank training. Aircraft shortages limited pilot training. Battlefield crises forced unprepared units into combat. Meanwhile, American soldiers were still training, marching, practicing, firing, learning. The result by 1943, a different army than the one Germany expected. By the time American divisions arrived in Sicily, Italy, and later Normandy, they were no longer the amateurs of 1941. They were Wehrmacht, well-fed, well-equipped, well-trained, well-led, well-supported, backed by overwhelming artillery, supplied by the world's largest logistics system, commanded by officers who had trained for years, composed of soldiers who had mastered modern tactics. Germany expected a repeat of 1918. Instead, they faced something new: a modern, mechanized, highly trained American army with unparalleled logistics, air support, and artillery. This was the army that would terrify German commanders in 1944-45. But the story's not over, because the next step of the transformation happened overseas in real combat. The real transformation happens in combat training camps, and maneuver areas built the structure of the U.S. Army. But its true transformation happened not in Louisiana or the Carolinas. It happened overseas, under fire. Because no matter how well a division trains, its real test comes only in combat, and when the U.S. Army entered battle in North Africa in late 1942, it discovered something painful. Training creates potential. Combat turns potential into power. The army that fought at Kasserine Pass was not yet the army that would break the German line in 1944. But the failure at Kasserine became the spark that forced the U.S. Army to adapt faster than any army in modern history. The first lesson, Kasserine Pass, February 1943. Kasserine was the shock, the humiliation, the moment the U.S. Army learned just how deadly the Wehrmacht could be. At Kasserine, American units broke under pressure, retreated chaotically, lost cohesion, failed to coordinate artillery, misused armor, lacked experienced NCOs, lacked aggressive leadership, communicated poorly, underestimated German skill. German commanders like Rommel and Bayerlein openly expressed surprise. They are brave, but inexperienced. This was not the army America needed. But instead of collapsing, the U.S. Army learned. Marshall, Eisenhower, Bradley, and Patton reacted instantly. Incompetent commanders were removed, staffs were reorganized, supply chains were tightened, new officers were promoted, doctrine was rewritten, units were retrained between battles, combined arms coordination was emphasized, communication discipline was enforced, aggressive leadership became mandatory, and within weeks, the same divisions that failed at Kasserine began winning battles. This rapid learning curve shocked German commanders. The second lesson, the artillery advantage. The U.S. Army had one critical strength that Germany underestimated at first: American artillery. American divisions used highly mobile 105mm and 155mm howitzers, superb fire direction centers, radios in every battery, fast survey teams, forward observers with jeeps, aerial spotters, smoke shells, illumination shells, white phosphorus, near-instant fire mission processing. German officers soon realized American artillery never stops. This was not an exaggeration. U.S. artillery could shift fire in minutes, coordinate across an entire corps, saturate enemy positions with massed barrages, support infantry with precise timing, fire smoke screens on demand, execute rolling barrages, destroy counterattacks in their tracks. In Sicily and Italy, German troops learned the pattern. First, American infantry would probe. Then, U.S. artillery would open fire. Then, armor and infantry advanced together. Then, more artillery followed. This predictable, relentless pressure broke German positions again and again. By 1944, German officers wrote in their diaries, "Their artillery is everywhere." The third lesson, logistics as a weapon. The Wehrmacht fought brilliantly when it had supplies, but by 1943, it almost never did. American divisions, meanwhile, had something unique: an endless river of fuel, ammunition, spare parts, trucks, food, and medical supplies. A single American infantry division consumed 650 tons of supplies per day in heavy combat, thousands of gallons of gasoline, hundreds of thousands of rounds of ammunition, spare parts for hundreds of vehicles, food for 15,000 men, medical supplies for hundreds of wounded daily. Germany could not match this scale. American logistics units were massive, trained, organized, flexible, and motorized. They built roads, repaired bridges, rerouted supplies, operated depots, ran convoys, managed truck fleets, and kept divisions fighting continuously. This meant U.S. forces could attack any day, attack anywhere, attack repeatedly, exploit breakthroughs, redeploy quickly, maintain pressure, sustain high-intensity combat indefinitely. German forces often fought brilliantly until they ran out of fuel or ammunition. American forces almost never did. The fourth lesson, air superiority. By 1943 in the Mediterranean and by 1944 in France, American ground forces enjoyed something the Wehrmacht rarely had: complete control of the sky. The U.S. Army Air Forces provided reconnaissance, close air support, interdiction, fighter cover, air superiority, bombing of German reinforcements, destruction of supply convoys, attacks on rail lines, attacks on bridges, constant pressure on German movement. German commanders often complained, "We cannot move in daylight." Even elite German units such as Panzer Lehr and the 12th SS Panzer Division lost hundreds of vehicles to American air attacks before reaching the battlefield. American infantry divisions entered battles with the wind at their backs, knowing P-47 Thunderbolts, P-51 Mustangs, and A-20 attack bombers were overhead. The Wehrmacht had no such protection. This alone changed the character of combat. The fifth lesson, leadership evolution. America's officer corps in 1942 was green. But by 1943-44, it evolved rapidly. Officers who could not handle combat were removed immediately. This was not personal or political. It was survival. In Italy alone, over 60 battalion and regimental commanders were replaced for poor performance. But the officers who remained became hardened, experienced, tactically skilled, quick learners, aggressive, reliable under fire, capable of independent action. By Normandy, the U.S. Army had one of the most adaptive command cultures in the world. German officers repeatedly wrote, "American commanders respond quickly." And this speed, this ability to correct mistakes fast, became one of the U.S. Army's greatest strengths. The sixth lesson, firepower over manpower. The U.S. Army learned that it did not need to match German infantry 1-to-1. Instead, it embraced a philosophy: win with firepower, not bodies. American units used massed artillery, heavy machine guns, mortars, anti-tank guns, tanks, tank destroyers, self-propelled guns, air support, radios for coordination. German infantry often found themselves outgunned before they could even close the distance. A German officer wrote, "American infantry seems weak until they call for artillery." This approach allowed American divisions to keep casualties lower while still pushing forward effectively. The seventh lesson, adaptation under fire. By the time U.S. divisions fought in Italy and Normandy, they had learned not to bunch up on roads, not to attack without artillery, not to advance without reconnaissance, not to expose flanks, not to underestimate German machine guns, not to allow tanks to operate unsupported, not to remain static under mortar fire, not to attack without smoke cover, not to ignore terrain. Each battle refined the doctrine further. The U.S. Army became a machine that learned every week, every month, every campaign. This learning curve was something the Wehrmacht could not match in 1944-45. Germany had lost too many experienced troops. It could no longer evolve, it could only react. America evolved non-stop. And the result, a new kind of army. By late 1943 and early 1944, American divisions were experienced, disciplined, well-led, well-fed, well-supplied, brutal in their use of artillery, fearless with armor support, accustomed to coordination, confident in air supremacy, flexible in tactics, aggressive when needed, cautious when appropriate, fast to exploit openings, relentless once they had momentum. German commanders began to realize this is not the American army we saw in North Africa. This is a different enemy, a dangerous one. The transformation was complete, but its results would only become fully visible in the battles of 1944-45. The army that arrived in France was not the one that left America. By the time the first U.S. divisions landed in Normandy in June 1944, they were no longer the inexperienced formations that Germany met in Tunisia. They were something entirely different. They were hardened by Italy, sharpened by months of constant combat, practiced in combined arms, led by aggressive officers, backed by overwhelming artillery, supported by the world's largest air force, supplied by an industrial empire, confident, adaptable, relentless. And when this army arrived in France, it collided directly with the Wehrmacht's best units. The results shocked German commanders. The Normandy fighting. Germany meets a new American army. German units in Normandy in 1944 included Panzer Lehr, one of the finest armored divisions ever created, 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, fanatical and well-equipped, 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, elite paratrooper regiments, battle-hardened infantry divisions. They expected to face amateur soldiers, just like at Kasserine Pass. Instead, they encountered disciplined American infantry, devastating American artillery, endless supply and fuel, near-constant U.S. air attacks, flexible small unit tactics, coordinated armor infantry assaults, rapid adaptation, enormous fire support from offshore naval guns. German officers quickly realized the Americans fight differently now. They fight with precision. What had changed? Everything. Was the weapon the Wehrmacht feared most, U.S. artillery. German commanders repeatedly wrote, "The Americans fight with artillery, not with men." U.S. artillery in Normandy operated like a machine. Fire missions processed in minutes. Radios at every level. Aerial observers calling corrections. Massed barrages used to destroy German counterattacks. Rolling barrages for infantry assaults. Smoke screens to hide movements. Saturation fire to break strong points. A single American infantry division could coordinate. 72, 105 mm howitzers, 12, 18, 155 mm guns, attached corps artillery, tank destroyers, naval gunfire if near the coast. This overwhelmed German defenses. A captured German officer said, "When the Americans find your position, you must leave it within minutes or die." Combat aggressiveness. The Germans did not expect, by 1944, U.S. infantry units were faster, more aggressive, more flexible, more confident, more accustomed to combined arms, willing to take initiative, capable of independent action. The comparison to 1942 was astonishing. At Kasserine, American units hesitated. In Normandy, they attacked relentlessly. Through hedgerows, through towns, through fortified lines. Often at night, using tanks, artillery, and engineers together. The famous hedgerow battles, bocage fighting, showed American innovation. Tanks with welded rhino tusks, engineer teams cutting hidden paths, artillery used like sniper rifles, coordinated small team maneuvers, constant adaptation. The Wehrmacht was not accustomed to an enemy that learned this fast. Sheshi, the U.S. soldiers' greatest advantage, replacements, supplies, and endurance. A German infantry division arriving in Normandy often had 12,000 men, 60% of its authorized vehicles, almost no fuel, limited artillery ammunition, poorly trained replacements, no air support, no chance of resupply. A U.S. division had 14,000, 15,000 men, full vehicle strength, full ammunition stockpiles, replacements arriving weekly, medical evacuation, constant resupply, functioning logistics, overwhelming firepower, complete air cover. German officers noted, "We destroy their units, and the next day, they are strong again." This was demoralizing. Germany could win tactical engagements, but every loss hurt them permanently. America could replace almost everything. The battle that terrified Germany, the breakout at St. Lo. In July 1944, after weeks of brutal hedgerow fighting, the U.S. Army unleashed Operation Cobra. What happened next became one of the most feared demonstrations of American power. 2,500 bombers blasted a corridor through German lines. Artillery saturated every German strongpoint. Tanks surged through the gap. Mechanized infantry followed. German units collapsed. Entire regiments disintegrated. Thousands were captured. General Fritz Bayerlein of Panzerlehr reported, "We were attacked from the air. The ground shook like an earthquake. Then, the Americans came through like a flood." It was the moment Germany understood. They were not fighting the army of 1942 anymore. They were facing the fully matured U.S. war machine. The final test, the Battle of the Bulge. In December 1944, Germany launched its last major offensive, the Ardennes counterattack, better known as the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler believed American divisions would break just like they did in 1942. He was wrong. American units at Bastogne, surrounded, freezing, outnumbered, refused to surrender. General McAuliffe famously replied to the German demand, "Nuts," and the entire American defense held long enough for Patton's Third Army to rescue them in a maneuver German officers thought impossible. The Germans expected panic. Instead, they found steel discipline, determined infantry, coordinated fires, brave junior officers, resilient leadership, unbreakable morale, unlimited artillery fire, constant counterattacks, brilliant logistics, rapid adaptation, relentless pressure. After the Bulge, German generals admitted privately, "We can no longer stop the Americans. They attack everywhere at once. Their artillery is crushing us. They have endless reserves. Their commanders learn quickly." This was the moment the Wehrmacht accepted that the U.S. Army had become a force more dangerous than they imagined. The final advance, why the U.S. Army became unstoppable, in 1945. By early 1945, the American divisions advancing into Germany were veteran formations, technically skilled, tactically flexible, confident in combat, supported by an unmatched supply chain, backed by overwhelming artillery, protected by absolute air superiority, led by highly competent officers, filled with seasoned NCOs, integrated with armor, engineers, and air-powered German units retreating before them often had exhausted soldiers, teenagers and older men, limited ammunition, little fuel, obsolete equipment, no air support, shattered logistics, inexperienced replacements, shattered morale. The contrast was overwhelming. The U.S. Army that crossed the Rhine and pushed into the heart of Germany was one of the most effective fighting forces in modern history. The final conclusion: how America built a division the Wehrmacht feared. America did not start the war with a powerful army. It built one. It built it through massive training programs, constant adaptation, aggressive leadership development, overwhelming logistics, unmatched artillery, technological innovation, integrated combined arms, huge industrial power, intelligence, and communication operational flexibility, and the ability to learn faster than any enemy before. The Wehrmacht respected American bravery, but what terrified German commanders was something else. The U.S. Army never stopped improving. From raw recruits in 1941 to unstoppable divisions in 1945, the transformation was complete. The Americans had become the very force the Wehrmacht had never wanted to face.